Good morning, guys. Today we're going to be looking at the quadratic function again, and we're going to be looking into a new function called the square root function. But we're still on the topic of parent functions. This is part 3 of parent functions. So we're going to be looking at the quadratic again, and so think of this as kind of an overview. Okay, and so for the quadratic function, if you remember from last time, we identified, well, for one, it has arrows going up, right, up here. But we identified 3 key points. If you remember, there was 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 4, which if I highlight them or put them on the graph are these 3 points right here. And so if we go the other way, right, it's negative 1, 1, negative 2, positive 4, because anything that's squared becomes positive, right? And then we have the vertex, which is this point right here. The location of that point is 0, 0. The axis of symmetry, which is the line that kind of, you could think of it as divides the quadratic function in half, creating like a mirror image. So this axis of symmetry is x equals 0. The y-intercept, where does the graph hit the y-axis? What's the location? Well, it's actually the same location as the vertex. So 0, 0. The minimum and maximum location is the same as the vertex and the y-intercept. And then for the minimum max value, we're just interested in, this is my x and my y value of the max. For the minimum maximum value, we're only interested in the y value. In this case, the y value is 0. Domain and range for quadratic, domain is going from left to right, and we're looking at the x values. So it goes from negative infinity to positive infinity. And then range is looking at scanning the graph from bottom to top. So from the bottom to the top, the lowest point of the graph is at y equals 0. So the range is from 0 to infinity, because the graph keeps going up. All right, so let's look at an example of the quadratic. And the reason that we're covering the quadratic again is because there's a connection between the quadratic and the new function that we want to look at today, which we're going to look at later in the notes. The other function that we're going to look at is called the square root function. So let's look at an example of a quadratic. And let me zoom out a little bit so we can see what they're asking us. Okay, so they're asking us what's the parent type, and I also want to put arrows on the graph. The parent type, we would say it's a quadratic. The equation is f of x equals x squared. The vertex, if we're looking for the vertex, that would be right here. So color it in purple. So there's the vertex. The location of the vertex is, if this is 0, 0, then you have to go 1, 2, 3 to the right, and 1, 2, 3, 4 up. So it's at 3, 4. The axis of symmetry is this line right here that divides the graph in half, right? This is the axis of symmetry. What is the value of it? At which x value does it happen? It looks like it's 1, 2, 3 at x equals 3. Okay, the y-intercept. The y-intercept. I'm trying to decide what color I should use. I guess let me pick one that would stand out. Okay, so for the y-intercept, it's the location where the graph hits the y-axis. So what's the location of this point? I know it's at -5, but that's the y value. But what is the coordinate? What's the location of that point? It's at 0, comma, -5. Okay. Minimum and maximum location. Again, minimum maximum location is the same location as the vertex. So it's at 3, comma 4. The minimum maximum value. Oh, and then also make sure that you circle, you select, is it a minimum or maximum? It is a maximum. It's a maximum. So think of this as like an option, right? We can pick minimum or maximum. We're going to say it's a maximum because it's at a high point. It's the peak of the quadratic function. Okay. The next thing, what's the max value? That would be the y coordinate, right? Because remember, this is x, this is y. So if I look at the y coordinate, then that's my max value. And I'm just going to put 4. Okay. Let me fill this in. Yeah. And put this back here. It's kind of editing. But yeah, so there's the max value. Domain and range. Remember, domain and range. Domain goes from left to right. So if let me pull out a tool here. And so let's say, I'm scanning from left to right. The arrow goes to the left towards negative infinity, then goes to the right towards positive infinity. Delete that. And so we're going to go from negative infinity to positive infinity. And then let's look at the range. The range is scanning from bottom to top. Now the arrows are pointing down, so that means they're going to go down towards negative infinity. And then as I scan up, what's the maximum point? It's at y equals 4. Delete this on the side over here. And so my range is from negative infinity to positive 4, close bracket. Okay. Now let's look at the square root function. Get the square root function. And so today this is the new parent function for today. So we have an arrow and we have kind of a starting point right there. And we like to call this, some of us like to call this the shooting star, because it has this kind of feature of shooting out this way, right? So we call this the shooting star. It kind of helps us remind us what the shape would look like for a square root function. This is the the equation for the square root function. Okay, so let me highlight some of these things. So this is the name of the type, and this is the equation. Okay. Now there's some key points that we're going to focus on for this graph, and it depends on the function, because the function is the square root function. And so we're going to pick the following x values: 0, 1, 4, and 9. Okay? We're going to pick these x values 0, 1, 4, and 9. And then I'm going to explain why we're picking these, right? So on the graph, it would be 0, 1, 4, and 9. Okay, and so what we want to do is we want to take these x values and input them into the equation. So the equation is the square root, right? So if I want to square root 0, what's the square root of 0? That's 0, so that goes right here. Then we're going to square root the 1. What's the square root of 1? 1. Okay, then we're going to square root the 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. So that goes here. Then we're going to square root the 9. And I hope you can see why we chose those numbers now, right? Because the x's that I chose, 0, 1, 4, 9, are all values that I can take the square root of. Okay? So these 4 points give you the shape of the graph, and so that you would connect these key points to make this graph. The starting point is where the first point that we listed. So in this case, the starting point is 0, 0. That's where the shooting star starts. It starts at a particular point and then it shoots out towards the right. So in this case, the starting point is at 0, 0. The domain is scanning from left to right. So if I do that, if I go from left to right, as I'm coming from the left, I hit the graph at 0, and then it goes towards infinity. So we're going to say it's from 0 to infinity. And then let's look at the range. The range is scanning from bottom to top. So as I'm coming from the bottom, I make contact with the graph at 0, and then the graph keeps going up towards positive infinity. So for the range, we're going to say it goes to a low point of 0 and then goes up towards positive infinity. Okay, so now let's look at an example with the square root function. And so there should be an arrow here, and there should be a point right here. Okay, so what's the starting point? Where's the location of this starting point? It looks like it's at -4, -1. So I'm going to color it in purple so I know which one I'm talking about. So we're talking about the point that's -4, -1. And then domain and range. I'm looking at the domain, it's from left to right. So as I'm coming from the left, when do I make contact with the graph? At what x value? And it would be at -4. And then as I keep scanning, the graph keeps going to the right towards positive infinity. So positive infinity. Then we're going to look at the range. Scanning from bottom to top. So as I'm approaching the graph from the bottom, I make contact at which y value? At -1. And then I keep scanning, and the arrow says that it's going to keep going up towards positive infinity. Yeah, so you should notice that for the domain and the range, that the values of the starting point are the x and the y are the domain and the range starting values. Right? Because remember, domain represents the x's, range represents the y's, so that's where they play a role. The parent type, we would say this is a square root. And the equation would be f of x equals the square root of x. And this concludes our lesson for today. So if you have any questions, feel free to bring them up during class. And thank you for joining me today. Have a great day, guys.